She spent 10 years building an empire for the man she loved, 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of loyalty, 10 years standing in his shadow so he could shine. And then, in just one afternoon, she discovered it was all a deception. He not only betrayed her with someone else, he erased her from his life as if she never existed. But he forgot one thing. She was the one who built everything he had. And what she built, she could destroy. Like and comment the city you're viewing in so I know how far this story has progressed. Don't leave, because the best part is yet to come. The ring sat on the edge of the bathroom sink like it had always belonged there. Gold band, 3 carats, princess cut. The kind of ring that made women in charity galas grip their champagne flutes a little tighter when Celine walked past. For 10 years she had worn it without thinking twice. It had become part of her the way a scar becomes part of skin. Present, permanent, unremarkable. She set it down carefully, not because she was being deliberate about it, because her hands had stopped working right. The marble was cold under her fingertips. She pressed both palms flat against the counter and stared at the woman in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes she'd been covering with concealer for 3 weeks, jaw tight enough to crack, hair pulled back so severely it looked punitive. She had been up since 4 in the morning reviewing quarterly fund transfers through 3 shell accounts in the Cayman infrastructure. She had flagged 2 anomalies, sent encrypted memos to the family's financial lieutenant, and by 9 she was dressed and in the back of an armored car heading to the Moretti estate for what Lucien had called a routine advisory meeting. It had not been a routine advisory meeting. The hallway outside Lucien's private study was long and marble-floored, and the sound of heels carried badly in that space. Celine had learned that years ago. She moved quietly by habit, years of navigating a household where walls had ears and doors had gaps, and information traveled faster than trust. She had been heading toward the east corridor, a shortcut she'd used 100 times, when she heard the low laughter first. Then the voice. Bianca's voice. That soft, practiced register the girl used when she wanted to sound younger than she was. Celine had stopped walking. The door to Lucien's private sitting room was not fully closed. Through the gap she could see the fireplace, the leather chair Lucien had custom ordered from a workshop in Florence, the chair he had always said was hers when she visited, a small, private joke between them that had calcified into something she'd taken for granted. Bianca was sitting in it. She was wearing the silk scarf, the pale champagne Hermès scarf Celine had left in the car 2 weeks ago and assumed lost. It was looped loosely around Bianca's neck with the kind of careless elegance that doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone has practiced it. Bianca's legs were crossed, one heel dangling, and she was laughing at something Lucien had said, head tilted back, and Lucien was leaning against the window frame with his arms crossed, and the look on his face. The look Celine recognized because she had spent a decade cataloging his expressions the way an analyst catalogs data, was not the look of a man tolerating his employees' familiarity. It was the look of a man who had already decided. Celine stood in the gap for 12 seconds. She counted them later, sitting in the car on the way back across the city, watching the river through tinted glass. 12 seconds. Then she had walked back down the hall the way she came, moving quietly, the way she always moved in that house. She had not made a sound. She did not make a sound now, in the bathroom, staring at her own reflection. She picked up the ring and held it for a moment. The weight of it, the familiar press of the setting against her palm. Then she set it back down on the marble and walked out. She did not take her coat. She did not call for a car. She walked through the east entrance, past 2 of Lucien's guards who straightened slightly when they saw her, and she kept walking. The afternoon was gray and cold, and the wind off the grounds cut through her blazer like it had personal intentions. She didn't stop. She called Marco, her own driver, from memory, stood at the edge of the private drive until the black sedan came, got in, said nothing for the first 15 minutes. Then, "Take me home." Marco didn't ask questions. That was why she trusted him. The apartment on the 43rd floor had always felt too large. Lucien had insisted on the size, had walked through it once when they first bought it, made notes about the light in the study, talked about how it would look when they finally consolidated their households after the wedding. After the wedding had been a phrase they used the way people use someday, casually, without a fixed date, as though the future were a place they were already standing. She had unpacked her books and hung her mother's photograph above the desk, and told herself it was temporary. That had been 4 years ago. She poured a glass of water she didn't drink and sat at the desk and opened her laptop. The anomalies and the fund transfers were still there, patient, waiting to be understood. She stared at them for a while. Numbers had always made more sense to her than people. Numbers didn't decide things with the look on their face. Numbers didn't have sitting rooms with barely closed doors. Her phone had already begun. 11 missed calls from Lucian, 3 texts. The first said, "Where did you go?" The second said, "Celine, answer the phone." The third said, "You're overreacting." She put the phone face down on the desk. She understood something then, clearly, without anger. Or rather, with anger compressed so small and dense it had become structural, load-bearing, holding her upright. She understood that the last 10 years had not been a partnership. They had been a negotiation she had not known she was losing. She had been his strategist, his financial architect. The invisible intelligence behind every move that had elevated the Moretti Syndicate from a regional operation into the most feared organization on the East Coast. She had restructured their offshore holdings during a federal investigation that should have ended them. She had negotiated the truce with the Falcone family in 2019 that had bought Lucian 3 years of consolidated power. She had sat in rooms where she was the only woman and made herself fluent in silences and read threats the way other people read weather, and she had done all of this because she had believed, genuinely, structurally believed, that she and Lucian were building something together. She had believed in him. She closed the laptop. Lucian Moretti arrived at the apartment at 9:17 that evening. He had his own key, which was a fact Celine registered and filed away. He came in without knocking, which was something he'd always done, and which had always felt like intimacy and now felt like something else entirely. He was still in his suit, deep charcoal, perfectly fitted, the kind of presence he carried everywhere that made rooms reconfigure around him. He was 44 years old, and he looked like authority had been built into his bone structure. He found her at the desk. She had not moved to the couch or the kitchen or anywhere that might suggest comfort or vulnerability. She was at the desk, as if this were a meeting. "You left without saying anything," he said. "I know. I've been calling you." "I know." He crossed the room and stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. The posture he used when he was trying to appear relaxed and wasn't. "Celine, whatever you think you saw, I know what I saw. It's not what it looked like." She looked at him, just looked. She had spent 10 years studying this man, and she knew every register of his voice and the specific quality of his stillness when he was managing a situation rather than responding to it. He was managing a situation right now. "She was wearing my scarf," Celine said. Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled. "She borrowed it from the car. It's a scarf. She was in my chair. There are multiple chairs in that room. Lucienne." Her voice was flat. Not cold, flat, the way a road is flat, the way flat things have no edges for sentiment to catch on. "Don't do that. Don't explain it. You know what you did. I know what you did. The only question left is how long it's been happening and how many people in your organization already know." The silence that followed had weight. He sat down on the couch across from her. Not beside her, the couch across, which meant he was choosing distance too, which told her more than anything he might say. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and the look on his face was something she might have once called remorse and now read as calculation. "It was a lapse," he said. "One lapse. In 10 years. Was it one?" He didn't answer immediately. That was an answer. "I want the ring back," he said. "I left it on the bathroom sink at the estate." "Celine, I'm not having this conversation." She stood. "You should go. We can discuss the financial positions next week with the lawyers present. There are 3 active operations I'm involved in that will need to be properly transitioned. I'll put together a document." He stared at her. "You're treating this like a business transaction. Aren't you?" He stood. He was taller than her by half a foot, and he used that sometimes, not aggressively. Lucian was too controlled for aggression, but deliberately. He moved toward her and stopped when she didn't move, didn't step back, didn't shift her weight even slightly. I am not going to let you walk away, he said. You don't have a mechanism to stop me. She said it quietly, without heat, and she watched him understand it, watched the thing cross his face that happened when men like Lucien encountered the limits of their authority. A flicker, gone in a second. But she saw it. Get out, Lucien. He left. She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair by the window and watched the city arrange itself in lights across the dark, and she thought, with the precision of someone who had spent her adult life inside systems of power, about what came next. Not emotionally. She gave herself 1 hour for that, somewhere around 2 in the morning, when the grief hit in a way she hadn't anticipated. Not for Lucien specifically, but for the decade of herself she had invested. The version of her that had believed the foundation was solid, that had built on it. 1 hour. Then she closed that door. By 4 in the morning, she was at the desk with the laptop open and a second coffee cooling beside her, and she had begun something she could not yet name but recognized as necessary. She pulled every financial record she had personal access to. Not the family's holdings, those were Lucien's, and she was not a thief, whatever else she was. But the parallel documentation she had kept, careful and obsessive, throughout the years. Her own records of her own strategic contributions. Encrypted, backed up, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly what to look for. She was building something. She didn't know what yet, but she was building. Plus, the first sign that something else was happening came 6 days later. She had been contacted by 3 of her longest-standing allies within the organization, men who had worked with her directly, who owed their current positions in part to her judgment. All 3 reached out within the same 48-hour window, not to offer support, to ask questions. Careful, hedged, deniable questions that added up, together, to a single inquiry. Is it true what they're saying about you? She didn't know what they were saying yet. She found out the next morning. An anonymous item had circulated through 3 underground media channels that served the criminal infrastructure, the kind of outlets that existed in the gray space between legitimate journalism and deliberate intelligence operations. The item described Celine Ashford as a woman who had become unstable following a personal rejection. It described her as a liability the Moretti organization had been managing for months. It described her access to sensitive financial documents as a security concern that was currently being reviewed. It was precise in the right places and vague in the right places, and it read like something written by someone who understood exactly how to move information through a system to do maximum damage without leaving fingerprints. Celine read it twice. Then she sat for a long moment with her coffee and thought about who had the capability to do this and the motive to do it now, and the specific knowledge required to hit the precise pressure points that would make men who knew her begin to doubt her. Bianca Vale had been Lucien's executive assistant for 14 months. Celine had originally underestimated her, a calibrated professional mistake that she was going to have to account for. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 2 years. It rang 4 times. "Romano?" said the voice on the other end. "It's Celine Ashford," she said. "I need to meet." There was a pause, not a hesitation. Dante Romano didn't hesitate. A calculation. Then, "When?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Somewhere neutral." And Dante, she paused. "Don't tell anyone I called." Another pause, shorter this time. "I never do," he said. She hung up and sat for a moment in the early light of the apartment and felt something shift inside her that she could not quite name. It was not hope. It was not anger. It was something older than either, the cold, particular clarity of a woman who had spent a decade building someone else's empire and had just begun to understand what she was actually capable of building for herself. Outside, the city was waking up. Somewhere across it, in the Moretti estate, the man who had dismissed her as overreacting was sitting at a breakfast table he had never had to set himself, in a position he had never had to earn alone, drinking coffee that had been made by hands that weren't his. And Bianca Vale was somewhere in that house. Wearing what, Celine didn't know yet. But she would find out. She was going to find out everything. She opened the laptop and went back to work. The neutral ground Dante Romano chose was a private dining room above a restaurant in the garment district, a place with no windows facing the street, a kitchen entrance that led out onto a service alley, and a maitre d' who had been on the Romano family's payroll for 11 years. Celine arrived 7 minutes early. She ordered water and sat with her back to the wall. Dante arrived exactly on time, which told her something. Men who arrived early were anxious. Men who arrived late were performing power. Men who arrived exactly on time had already decided the meeting mattered and didn't need to pretend otherwise. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe she had remembered him smaller because it was easier to file him that way. A threat at a distance, a name on a page. The head of a family whose territory bordered Moretti's along the northeastern corridor like a fault line waiting to shift. He wore a dark jacket, no tie, and he moved through the room the way men move when they've spent their lives making sure no one gets behind them. He sat across from her and looked at her directly, which was also something. Most men in his position would have spent the first 3 minutes establishing dominance through some ambient performance of it. Dante just looked at her. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't." "You want coffee?" "I want to know if you'll listen to me without assuming you already know what I'm going to say." He leaned back slightly. Not away, back. The distinction mattered. It was the posture of a man giving something room. "Go ahead," she told him. Not everything. She was not reckless, and she was not yet certain where Dante's interests aligned with hers and where they didn't. But she told him the outline, the affair, the scarf, the chair, her departure from the estate, the anonymous media items that had appeared within 6 days, the specific language used, the specific pressure points targeted, the specific knowledge required to construct a campaign that precise. She watched him while she talked. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react visibly beyond a slight tension around his eyes when she described the media items. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long do you think Bianca Vale has been running this?" he said. It was exactly the right question. Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Maybe Lucien didn't know." Not, "What do you want me to do about it?" He went straight to the operational question, which meant he was already treating it as a real problem rather than a domestic grievance. "At minimum 8 months, Celine said, based on the specificity of what's been leaked about my involvement in the organization's financial restructuring. That information wasn't in any document I shared with Lucien in the past 8 months. It predates the period when I became aware of Bianca's position. So she had access before she was his assistant, or she was placed as his assistant for that reason." Dante was quiet again. He turned his water glass a quarter rotation on the table, something she suspected he did without knowing he did it. "You're telling me someone seeded her into the Moretti organization." "I'm telling you it's possible. I don't have evidence yet. I have a pattern." "What do you need from me?" "Your investigative infrastructure. The people who pull financial threads without leaving their own thread behind. I have records. My own, from my own documentation. But I need cross-referencing I can't do alone, and I can't use anyone inside the Moretti organization right now without risking exposure." "Because you don't know who she's turned." "Correct." He looked at her steadily. "And what do I get out of this?" She had anticipated the question. She had also decided she was not going to insult him with a prepared answer that sounded like a prepared answer. "I don't know yet," she said. "That depends on what we find. If Bianca Vale is running intelligence operations inside the Moretti syndicate, anything she's touched has a leak in it. Every alliance, every negotiation, every external-facing operation for the past year or more. You have interests that intersect with the Moretti organization along the northeastern corridor. Anything compromised there affects you too. You're saying my own house may have drafts in it. I'm saying you should want to know either way." Another silence. Outside the room, somewhere in the kitchen, someone was moving pans. The sound was domestic and strange in context. "All right," Dante said. "I'll put 2 people on it. You give me your documentation and I'll start cross-referencing. I need to know their names before I hand over anything." He almost smiled. Not quite. "Fair." But she did not tell Dante everything she was feeling, which was not dishonesty so much as triage. What she felt was enormous and structural, and she could not afford to let it operate at full volume while she was still inside the situation. She felt it in managed intervals. On the car ride home, In the 20 minutes before sleep, when the discipline dropped away and the reality of it moved through her without obstruction. 10 years. The weight of 10 years of a specific kind of trust. The kind you build not from sentiment, but from surviving things together, from being in rooms where the stakes were genuine and real, and coming out of them as a unit. She had believed in that. She had built on that belief the way you build on bedrock. It had not been bedrock. She let herself feel that in the car. Then she put it away. Chit. 3 days after the meeting with Dante, she received a call from Carla Reyes, a woman who handled external communications for the Moretti organization and who had, over 7 years, become something close to what Celine would cautiously call a friend. Carla called from a number Celine didn't recognize. First sign. "You need to know something happened this morning," Carla said without preamble. Her voice had the quality of someone speaking in a space they weren't certain was private. At the main offices, Bianca came in with 2 of Lucien's captains, and she held what they're calling an advisory session with the senior staff. She used your name several times. Celine kept her voice even. In what context? She described certain financial decisions you were involved in over the past 3 years as, her word was, unauthorized. She said there are discrepancies in the restructuring of the offshore infrastructure that need to be reviewed, and that you may have been moving funds for personal benefit. The kitchen floor of Celine's apartment was cold under her bare feet. She had been making coffee when the call came, and she was still standing at the counter. She gripped it now with one hand, not from shock. She had been anticipating escalation, but from the specific cold anger that comes from watching a move you predicted land precisely where you expected. She said this in front of the senior staff, in front of 7 captains and the financial lieutenants. Lucien was present. And Lucien said, Carla paused. That pause was its own answer. He said the matter was under internal review. Celine set down her coffee mug. He didn't correct her. No. Thank you, Carla. Don't call me from your regular number for a while. She hung up, stood at the counter for a moment, breathed. They were moving faster than she'd estimated, which meant either Bianca felt pressure, possibly had sensed that Celine was building something, some counter-movement, or she had a timeline Celine didn't yet understand. Either way, the acceleration changed the calculus. Celine had been operating on the assumption that she had 3 to 4 weeks before the campaign against her credibility reached a critical point. She was revising that estimate downward. She called Dante. They've accused me of financial fraud in front of the senior staff, she said when he picked up. A brief silence. When? This morning, Bianca Vale, with 2 of Lucien's captains present. Your people need to move faster on the cross-referencing. I'll push them. Dante. She paused. Is there anything on the Moretti side, or any of their current external negotiations that involves your family's territory? There's an international alliance being finalized. European security infrastructure. Your name was part of the original proposal as a guarantor of the Moretti side's integrity. She had not known that. She absorbed it. Has my name been removed? As of 2 days ago, yes. So that was the timeline. Bianca had a specific target, not just Celine's reputation in the abstract, but Celine's role in a particular deal large enough to matter geopolitically within the underworld structure. Remove Celine from the table, install whoever Bianca's principals wanted in that role, and the alliance shifted. Celine had been thinking about this as a personal attack. It was larger than personal. I need to meet again, she said. Tonight, he said. Same place. She wore flat shoes and a coat with deep pockets, and she took a cab rather than her own car, paying cash. She was not being paranoid. She was being accurate about the level of threat. Dante was already there when she arrived, which this time told her he was concerned. He had 2 sheets of paper in front of him on the table, printed, which meant his people had already found something. The fund transfers, he said. Your documentation was correct. There are anomalies going back 11 months, but the methodology isn't consistent with external fraud. The patterns look internal. Someone using authorized access to route money in small enough increments to stay below the automatic audit thresholds. Bianca had authorization access through Lucien's credentials. That's what it looks like, yes, But there's something else. He turned one of the sheets toward her. 3 of those transfers don't go to external accounts. They route through a holding entity registered in Delaware 8 months ago. We traced the beneficial ownership. Celine looked at the paper. The name on it was not Bianca Vale's name. It was a name she had seen before, once, briefly, on a contract she had reviewed in her capacity as the Moretti Organization's strategic advisor. A contract for private security consultation with an entity that worked primarily in intelligence services. She's not freelancing, Celine said. No, Dante said. She was sent. The two of them sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car horn somewhere on the street, the ambient sound of a city that didn't know or care what was being understood in a private dining room above a restaurant in the garment district. Who sent her? Celine said. It wasn't quite a question. We don't know yet. The Delaware entity has 3 layers of ownership structure between it and anything traceable. My people are working on it. How long? Days? Maybe a week? She looked at the paper for another moment. Then she looked up at Dante. What's your interest in the International Alliance? He met her eyes. I'm one of the parties being courted, the European security infrastructure. It's significant, 20-year terms. If the Moretti side can't deliver a credible representative, they'll come to you directly. Something like that. She looked at him. He held the look. There was no apology in his face, and she didn't want one. She wanted honest men, and honest men in their position didn't apologize for having interests. You should know, she said, that whatever this becomes, I am not doing this to win Lucien back. I want that clearly understood. I understand it. And I'm not doing it to destroy him either. I'm doing it because someone planted a spy inside an organization I spent 10 years building, and that spy has accused me publicly of crimes I didn't commit, and I am going to prove it. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, Dante said. With what I need. No, she said. They're not. Pod. The next 3 days moved in a particular register she had learned to function inside. The narrow, pressurized channel between knowing something catastrophic is coming and not yet being able to stop it. She went about her routines with the mechanical discipline of someone who understood that falling apart was a luxury with a very high cost. She slept in 4-hour intervals. She ate because her body required it. She worked. On the 4th day, she was denied entry to the Moretti financial offices. She stood outside the building on a Tuesday morning with her laptop bag over her shoulder and her access card, refused 3 consecutive times before the lobby security guard, a man named Vincent who had been in that position for 6 years and who she had personally recommended for a salary increase in 2022, looked at her with something in his face she could only read as pity. I'm sorry, Ms. Ashford, he said. I have instructions. She looked at him steadily. She did not make a scene. She did not raise her voice. She said, I understand, Vincent, and she turned and walked back out onto the street and stood in the November wind and breathed through it. She called Dante from the corner. They've pulled my building access, she said. How long ago? I'm finding out right now. She paused. They're not just managing me. They're cutting me off. They want me isolated before whatever's coming next. What do you think is coming next? She thought about it. About Bianca's specific operational style as she was beginning to understand it. Methodical, escalating, designed to close options one at a time rather than detonate everything at once. Take the credibility. Take the access. Take the professional standing. Then, when the target had no ground left to stand on, deliver the final blow in a public arena. Something public, Celine said. She needs a moment. A visible moment where Lucien chooses her in front of witnesses who matter. The alliance signing, Dante said, or something around it. She watched a cab go past. When is it scheduled? 3 weeks. She stood on the corner for another moment, coat pulled tight, the city moving around her with its ordinary indifference. 3 weeks. Keep your people on the Delaware trace, she said. I need to know who sent her before that signing. I need the full picture. She hung up and started walking. She had nowhere specific to go, which was a new feeling, and she chose not to examine it too closely. She walked 6 blocks before her phone buzzed. Not a call, a message from a number she didn't recognize, which was increasingly how she received information now. The message contained a photograph. She stopped walking, looked at the image. It was from inside the Moretti estate, the main reception hall, the kind of photograph taken at an informal gathering of the family's inner circle. Lucien was visible in the background. In the center of the frame, holding a glass of wine and speaking with two of the senior captains as if she had been standing in that circle for years, was Bianca Vale. She was wearing Celine's mother's necklace. The diamond piece, 3 strands, antique setting, irreplaceable. The one thing Celine had entrusted to Lucien's private vault 5 years ago when she'd been traveling abroad and hadn't wanted it left in an unoccupied apartment. The one thing she had asked him explicitly to keep safe. The one thing that had belonged to her mother and therefore to some version of herself that existed before any of this. Before the empire and the strategy and the ring and the decade of building something on ground that turned out to be hollow. Bianca was wearing it like it was nothing, like it was an accessory. Like it was hers. Celine's hand tightened around the phone until she could feel the edge of the case cutting into her palm. She had been managing this. She had been precise and controlled and strategic, and she had given herself the 1-hour intervals and put things away in the right compartments and kept functioning at the level this situation required. She had done all of that because she was not a woman who fell apart, had never been a woman who fell apart, had learned very young that the world inside which she moved did not offer the luxury of falling apart. But her mother's necklace. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed, in, out, in. The cold air moved through her like something surgical. She breathed until her hand relaxed around the phone, until the thing inside her that wanted to detonate compressed back into something she could carry. Then she called Lucien. He answered on the second ring. "Celine, the necklace," she said. A pause. Brief, but she heard the character of it. "The necklace my mother left me," she said. "That I asked you to keep in your private vault. That you promised me was safe. I need you to tell me how it ended up around Bianca Vale's neck at a family gathering tonight." Silence. "Lucien, it was a misunderstanding," he said. "She found it in the vault when she was helping me reorganize some documents. She was in your private vault, and I didn't realize she'd taken it. I'll get it back." "You'll get it back." Celine's voice was very quiet, very flat. The kind of flat that comes after something breaks so cleanly the edges don't even bleed. "You'll get it back." "Celine, the situation with the family right now is complicated. I need you to understand that I'm managing. I want the necklace returned to me by Friday," she said. "If it is not returned to me by Friday, I will begin a conversation with the Commission about the unauthorized access to Moretti financial accounts, using your personal credentials that has been occurring for the past 11 months. I have documentation. I have cross-referenced records. I have enough to open a formal inquiry." Dead silence on the line. "You don't have," he started. "Try me," she said. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk outside a dry cleaner on a street she didn't particularly know, and she looked at the photograph on her phone one more time. Bianca Vale with the necklace. Bianca Vale standing in the center of a circle that had once been Celine's. Bianca Vale, who had been sent, not stumbled, not opportunistically moved in, sent into the Moretti organization by someone with a long-term agenda and the patience to execute it through a woman and a weakness and a private vault left unlocked. Celine knew something then. Not from evidence. The evidence was still being assembled, the Delaware layers still being peeled back. She knew it from the specific, accurate instinct of someone who had spent a decade inside power structures and learned to read their logic the way other people read language. This was not over. This had barely begun. And whatever Bianca was planning for the finale, the public moment, the visible choosing, the detonation in front of witnesses, it was going to be worse than anything Celine had anticipated so far. She put the phone in her pocket and started walking back toward the main avenue to find a cab, and she was already thinking, already building, already 2 moves ahead of the woman who thought she had cornered her when her phone buzzed again. This time it was Dante, a single line of text. "We found the 3rd layer. You need to see this tonight." Celine stopped walking. Read the message again. Felt something cold move through her that was not fear. She was past fear at this point. Fear required uncertainty, and she was becoming very certain about very terrible things. but was its close neighbor. The specific sensation of a door opening onto a room you already knew was going to change. The restaurant was empty by the time she arrived. The kitchen staff had gone home, and the maitre d' let her in through the service entrance without a word, and she climbed the stairs to the private room where Dante was waiting with a man she didn't recognize. Mid-50s, heavy through the shoulders, the kind of face that had been rearranged at least once by something that wasn't an accident. The man was introduced as Heiress. No last name. He worked, Dante said, in financial forensics, and he had been working on the Delaware layers for the past 18 hours without sleeping. There were 7 printed pages on the table. Celine sat down and picked up the first page and read it. Then she read it again. Then she set it down and picked up the second page, and the room was very quiet except for the sound of the building settling around them, and somewhere outside, distant, a siren moving through the city and fading. She read all 7 pages without speaking. Then she set them down and sat with her hands flat on the table and breathed. "How confident are you?" she said. Heiress had the voice of someone who had been delivering bad news for so long it no longer registered on his face. On the beneficial ownership structure, completely confident. On the authorization chain, he touched the 4th page. I'd say 92%. The final link between the Delaware entity and the principal is 1 inference deep. Everything else is documented. The beneficial owner of the Delaware entity, 3 layers of holding companies, 2 offshore jurisdictions, 1 nominee director in Luxembourg who Heiress had cross-referenced against a database of known intelligence-adjacent corporate structures, was a man named Theodore Ashby. Celine knew the name. She knew it the way you know a name you have filed carefully in a specific drawer and never expected to need again. Theodore Ashby ran a private strategic intelligence firm called Meridian Consulting. Meridian operated in the gap between legitimate corporate intelligence work and the kind of operations that never appeared in any public record. They had been contracted by the Moretti organization 3 years ago for a single advisory engagement related to a political lobbying effort. Celine had reviewed the contract. She had flagged a clause in it as overly broad in terms of the information access it granted Meridian's personnel, and she had sent a memo to Lucien recommending the clause be revised. The clause had not been revised. She had followed up twice. Both times Lucien had said he would handle it. She had eventually moved on because there were always 10 other things requiring her attention, and she had trusted. There was that word again, that bedrock word. She had trusted that Lucien understood the risk she had identified. He had not handled it. And this was the thing she was sitting with now, the thing that made her hands press harder against the table surface. He had handled it exactly as he intended to. "The authorization chain," she said. Her voice was level. She was working to keep it level. "Walk me through it." Heiress pulled the 4th page forward. "The financial access Bianca Vale used to route the fund transfers. It went through Lucien Moretti's credentials, which is consistent with what you already knew. But the specific authorization that granted those credentials elevated access to the offshore infrastructure, the access that would have been necessary to reach the accounts Bianca was moving money through. That authorization was issued 14 months ago, 2 weeks before Bianca Vale was hired as Lucien's executive assistant." Celine looked at the page. Someone knew she was coming. Someone created the access for her before she arrived. Who issued the authorization? Heiress was quiet for a moment. Then he placed his finger on a line near the bottom of the page. Celine read the name. She read it twice, the way she had read the first page, methodically, as if reading it again might change what it said. The authorization had been issued by the Moretti organization's internal security director, a man named Paul Carver, who had been in that position for 9 years, who Celine had personally vetted when he was promoted, who had sat in her kitchen once, 3 Christmases ago, eating takeout with her and Lucien, and talking about his daughter's acceptance into a pre-law program, and who she had thought of, in the loosely categorical way you think of people who orbit a life, as part of the architecture of trust she had believed she was standing on. She moved her eyes from the page to the table surface. She kept her face still. She was very good at keeping her face still. "Paul Carver," she said. "Yes. He's been inside Meridian's structure for how long? Based on the financial trail, at least 2 years before Bianca was placed. So roughly 3 years total. 3 years. Carver had been compromised for 3 years, which meant he had been compromised during the federal investigation that Selene had navigated the Moretti organization through, the investigation she had considered her most important strategic success, the thing she had built her sense of the work's value on. She had guided them through it believing the internal security apparatus was clean, believing the information she was protecting was contained, believing the walls were solid. The walls had had a door in them the entire time. She stood up. She needed to stand. She moved to the window. There was one small window in the private room, frosted glass, facing a light well, and she stood with her back to both men and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed. Behind her, neither man spoke. Dante, she was learning, understood the value of silence. She stood there for perhaps 45 seconds. Then she turned around. "What did they get?" she said. "During the federal investigation. If Carver was feeding them for 2 years before Bianca arrived, what did Meridian have access to?" Ferris looked at his pages. "Based on the access logs we've been able to reconstruct, witness cooperation status, financial account locations, the offshore routing used to move funds during the active investigation period, communication records between Moretti's legal team, and—" "Stop," she said. She sat back down. The federal investigation, the one she had been most proud of, the one where she had believed their survival had come from her own strategic competence, from the memos she'd written, the legal arguments she'd shaped, the witnesses she'd coached on what to say and what to withhold. She had believed they had made it through because she was good at what she did. They had made it through because someone had been feeding the opposition exactly as much information as served a purpose, and withholding the rest, controlling the investigation's outcome from the inside. Not for the Moretti organization's benefit. For Meridian's. For whatever Meridian's principles had needed from the Moretti syndicate's survival at that specific moment. She had not saved them. She had been a piece in someone else's game. Her jaw was tight enough to ache. She relaxed it deliberately. "Dante," she said. "Yes." "The International Alliance. The European Security Infrastructure deal. What does Meridian stand to gain if the Moretti side fails to deliver a credible representative and the deal restructures?" Dante was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it. He was fast. She had already noted that, his processing speed. It was one of the things that made him something other than just dangerous. "If the Moretti side collapses," he said slowly, "and the alliance needs a new anchor on the American end, Meridian's parent structure has a legitimate facing security consultancy that has been positioning itself for exactly that kind of international contract for the past 18 months. So they take the deal," she said. "They burn down the Moretti syndicate from the inside using Bianca as the accelerant. They eliminate me as the person most likely to identify what's happening, and they walk into the vacancy they created. With Paul Carver presumably positioned to manage the transition on the ground," Dante said. The 3 of them sat with this. Outside the frosted window, the light well was dark, and the building was quiet, and the city outside was doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous. "When is Carver next scheduled to be at the Moretti main offices?" Selene said. "I can find out," Dante said. "I need to talk to him." "That's not for information," she said. "I already have the information. I need to look at his face." Sad. She did not sleep that night. She went home and sat at the desk and rebuilt her understanding of the past 3 years from the foundation up, inserting the Meridian variable into every calculation she had made, every strategic decision she had felt certain about, and watching each of them transform into something different. It was a specific kind of grief, this, not the clean grief of losing a person, but the grinding, structural grief of losing your own competence, your own confidence in your judgment, your belief that you had understood the room you were in. She had not understood the room. She had understood the surface of the room, the walls she could see. She had been brilliant and disciplined and genuinely skilled, and it had not been enough because the game was being played in a dimension she hadn't known to look for. She sat with that until approximately 3 in the morning. Then she put it away. Not because it was resolved, it wasn't, but because she needed to function, and functioning required a specific kind of compartmentalization. She had learned not from anyone who taught her, but from the sheer accumulated practice of being a woman inside a structure that did not forgive weakness. She opened the laptop and began writing a document, organized, precise, cross-referenced, everything she had, everything Dante's people had found, structured in a way that would be immediately legible to anyone who needed to understand it quickly. She wrote until 6 in the morning. Then she showered and changed and called Dante. "Carver's at the main offices today," he said. "Routine security briefing. He'll be there until 2. "I'll be there at 11. "Celine," something in his voice, cautious. "If he knows you've found him, he'll move. He'll alert Meridian and everything gets accelerated." "I know. So why?" "Because I need to know if Lucian knew," she said. "And I can't get that from a document. I need to see Carver's face when I say Lucian's name." Getting into the Moretti main offices without triggering immediate security response required a specific approach. Her building access had been revoked at the lobby level, but she still had secondary credentials for the parking structure, a redundancy that Carver himself had built into the system, which struck her now as either an oversight on his part or something more deliberate, a door left ajar. She chose not to examine the implications of that too closely and used it. The interior security on the executive floor was handled by 2 guards she knew personally. She walked past the first with the particular confidence of someone who belonged in a space and had never not belonged, and he straightened and said, "Ms. Ashford, you're not..." And she said, "I know, I just need 5 minutes with Paul, I'll be in and out," in the tone she had used for 10 years in this building when she needed something to happen without friction, and she was past him before the incomplete understanding could calcify into a response. Carver was in his office with the door half open. Celine pushed it the rest of the way and walked in and closed it behind her. He looked up from his desk, and in the first half second before his face arranged itself, she saw it. The thing she had come for. The specific involuntary quality of a person who has been found. Not surprise. Surprise is what happens when something unexpected occurs. This was recognition, and recognition of something that had been anticipated with dread. He had known this moment was coming. He had been waiting for it. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. She did not speak immediately. She looked at him the way she looked at numbers, seeking the pattern, the internal logic that made the current state legible. Paul Carver was 51 years old. He had a daughter in law school and a weekend place in Connecticut, and a small scar above his left eyebrow from something he had told her once was a childhood bicycle accident. He looked right now like a man in physical pain. "How long?" she said. He started to speak, stopped. His mouth closed. He looked at his desk. "Paul, how long?" "Celine." "Don't say my name like that. Don't do that." She heard the edge in her own voice and did not moderate it. "How long have you been reporting to Meridian?" 3 years, he said, quietly, barely above a whisper. "During the federal investigation?" "Yes." "Did you know about Bianca before she was placed?" A pause. "I was told someone would be coming. I didn't know who. But you created the access." "I was instructed to." "By Meridian?" "Yes." She watched him. His hands were on the desk, flat, the way hands go when a body is trying to make itself smaller. He was not a violent man. He was a man who had made a choice 3 years ago for reasons she didn't yet know and had been living inside the consequences of that choice for every day since, and sitting across from her now, he looked like the consequence had finally arrived in full. "Did Lucienne know?" she said. The pause was longer this time, much longer. "Paul." "Not at the beginning," he said. The room rearranged itself around those 4 words. "When?" she said. 8 months ago. Meridian made a direct approach to him. They laid out what they had, the access, the ongoing operation, Bianca's placement. They offered him a choice. He stopped. His jaw moved. They told him the empire could continue under their management framework, or it could face a structured exposure. Carver stopped again. "He chose the management framework," Celine said. Carver didn't answer. He didn't have to. She sat for a moment. She could hear her own heartbeat. She was aware of the texture of the chair beneath her hands, the specific quality of the light in the office, the small framed photograph of Carver's daughter on the desk beside his laptop. She registered these things with the heightened involuntary clarity of moments when the architecture of a life shifts. Lucien had known. For 8 months. He had known Bianca was an operative. He had known about Meridian. He had known about Carver. He had chosen to continue, to absorb the Meridian framework, to allow Bianca to run her operation, to permit the dismantling of Celine's credibility and access, because the alternative was exposure, and he had calculated that Celine was an acceptable loss. He had not chosen Bianca over her in a moment of weakness. He had chosen Meridian over her in a moment of strategy. She stood. Her legs were steady. She was mildly surprised by that. "You're going to tell Lucien I was here," she said. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Carver said. "You're going to tell him, because you're still inside their structure and they'll know I was here before the end of the day anyway. So tell him." She moved toward the door. "Tell him I know. Tell him all of it." She paused with her hand on the door. "Your daughter. Which firm is she hoping to work for?" Carver blinked. The shift in register clearly disoriented him. "What?" "Your daughter, law school. You told me she had a firm in mind." Morrison and Kent." "Why, because when this is over," Celine said, "and the Commission opens its investigation into the unauthorized use of Moretti financial infrastructure for Meridian's purposes, the people who cooperated early will be in a significantly better position than the people who didn't. You might want to think about your daughter before you decide which category to put yourself in." She opened the door and walked out. What? She made it to the stairwell before her legs decided they were done pretending. She sat on the stairs between the 8th and 9th floor and put her head back against the concrete wall and breathed. The stairwell smelled like dust and the particular cold of spaces that don't get enough air, and somewhere far below her she could hear the distant rhythm of the lobby, the ordinary sound of a building going about its business. Lucien had known. She turned that over slowly, the way you turn something over when you need to feel all its edges. He had known for 8 months. He had sat across from her in the apartment that night, the night she had told him to leave, the night she had managed herself so carefully, the night she had believed she was the one who understood the truth of the situation. And he had known. He had known about Carver and Bianca and Meridian and the offshore transfers and the campaign to destroy her credibility, and he had said it was a lapse and you're overreacting, and he had known. The grief she had been compartmentalizing for 3 weeks, the grief she had been giving carefully managed 1-hour intervals. It cracked open fully now in the stairwell, briefly, violently, the way real grief comes when it's been held too long. Her chest compressed, and her eyes burned, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and gave it 45 seconds. 45 seconds. Then she breathed. Then she stood. Then she took out her phone and called Dante. "I need you to do something," she said. Her voice was raw at the edges. She didn't try to smooth it. "I need you to reach out to Meridian's opposing parties, whoever they've been working against on the European deal, whoever their principals are trying to displace, because Meridian isn't just running an operation inside the Moretti syndicate. They're positioning to take the international alliance, and the people they're about to replace are going to want to know that." "You're building a counter-coalition," Dante said. "I'm building a fire," she said, "and I need accelerant." There was a beat of silence. Then Dante said, "There's something else you need to know, something that came in an hour ago." A pause that had weight in it. "Bianca Vale has announced publicly, through the family's social network, to every Don currently in the city for the pre-alliance meetings. Tell me." "She's pregnant," Dante said. "She's saying it's Lucien's child. She made the announcement at a dinner tonight, in front of 5 family heads." Celine stood in the stairwell with the phone against her ear and the concrete wall cold behind her and the sound of the building going on without her, and she understood, with complete and terrible clarity, that the thing she had been calling a campaign had just become something. She came out of the stairwell into the cold and walked 3 blocks before she called Dante back. "The pregnancy announcement," she said. "When exactly?" "Tonight, 7:15, Garrison Club dinner, pre-alliance social, 5 family heads present, plus their advisors and at least a dozen captains." A pause. Celine. She did it in front of the commission's observer, the man Caruso sends to every major social event to take the temperature of the families. Caruso, the head of the commission's oversight body, the man whose endorsement or withdrawal of endorsement could make or end a dawn standing in a single conversation. She timed it, Celine said. Perfectly. She stopped walking. A cab went past, didn't stop. The wind off the cross street was bitter and direct, and she stood in it and thought with the compressed, furious efficiency of someone who has just watched the board reset into a configuration significantly worse than the one they were managing. Bianca had announced a pregnancy in front of the commission's observer, which meant within 48 hours, Caruso's office would have a formal record of the claim, which meant any action Celine took against Bianca in the next 48 hours would be read, in that context, as an attack on a pregnant woman carrying the heir to the Moretti line. It was elegant. It was the kind of move that could only be designed by someone who understood the specific, archaic weight of that symbolism within the commission's framework. The way these men, brutal and modern in most respects, still operated according to a code that placed the protection of family bloodlines above almost every other consideration. Bianca had not just announced a pregnancy, she had put on armor. I need everything Ferris can pull on the medical side, Celine said. OB records, fertility clinic visits, anything at all that touches Bianca Vale, and a pregnancy claim. I need it in 12 hours. That's a narrow window. Then he should start now. She started walking again. And I need to know who Bianca's personal physician is, not the family doctor she uses for the organization's records. Her actual personal physician. How do you know those are different? Because Bianca Vale doesn't do anything without a backup she controls completely. She has a personal physician who is not connected to the Moretti infrastructure. Find that person. She hung up and kept walking, and the city moved around her in its indifferent rhythm, and she let the motion of it carry her through the worst of the immediate adrenaline. She needed to think without the static of what she was feeling, and what she was feeling was enormous and multi-chambered, and could not be permitted to operate at full volume for another. She checked her watch. 15 hours, minimum. She had 15 hours before this became something she could no longer manage from the outside. Ferris called at 2:17 in the morning. She was at the desk, had been at the desk for hours, the apartment dark except for the laptop screen and the ambient glow of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. No OB records under her legal name going back 18 months, he said. No fertility clinic visits in the tri-state area. No prenatal blood work through any of the major lab networks I can access. The personal physician. Still working, but I found something adjacent. She heard him move papers. Bianca Vale has a cousin, maternal side, lives in Queens. The cousin is a licensed physician's assistant working at a private clinic in Midtown that specializes in, and I'm reading this directly, executive health services and concierge medical documentation. Celine was very still. Concierge medical documentation, she said. The clinic has been cited twice by the state medical board for irregularities in record generation. Both citations were resolved through what the board's public file describes as corrective administrative action. Neither resulted in license revocation. A clinic that generated medical records, run by Bianca's cousin, who had been cited for irregular record generation. The pregnancy documents, Celine said. She didn't falsify them after the fact. She had them prepared in advance. That would be my read, yes. She absorbed this. Then, can you get me something definitive, something a medical examiner or a commission-appointed physician would recognize as conclusive evidence of document fabrication? If I can get access to the clinic's actual patient records, the internal system, not the documents they generate for clients, yes. The metadata on generated documents compared to authentic records has specific signatures, timestamps, software markers, the way certain fields populate automatically. A forensic document examiner could make the case in front of any credible body. How do you get access to the internal system? I would need someone physically inside the clinic's administrative network, or someone who has legitimate access and is willing to use it for this purpose. A brief pause. The cousin, Celine repeated. She thought about that, about what it would take to approach a woman who was likely aware of what her clinic had done, who was connected to Bianca by blood, who had something to lose, and offer her a calculation that made cooperation more attractive than loyalty. "Find me everything on the cousin," she said. "Personal, professional, financial, everything." "By morning?" "By morning." She did not sleep. At 5, she made coffee and stood at the window watching the city come back to itself in the gray pre-dawn, and she thought about Lucian. She had been thinking around him, thinking about Bianca, Meridian, Carver, the commission, the alliance, the pregnancy claim. And she recognized now, deliberately not thinking about Lucian directly, because thinking about him directly required looking at something she had been avoiding. She looked at it now. He had made a choice. 8 months ago, presented with the truth of what Meridian was doing inside his organization, he had made a rational strategic calculation and decided that his empire's survival under Meridian's management framework was preferable to exposure. He had decided Celine was part of what he could afford to sacrifice in that calculation. She did not hate him for it. That surprised her slightly. She had expected to find hate when she looked directly at this, and instead she found something colder and more clarifying. She understood him. She understood exactly the fear that had driven the calculation, the specific terror that a man like Lucien Moretti felt when he looked at the possibility of losing everything he'd built. And she understood that in that moment of terror he had looked at what he had and what he could keep and made the oldest, worst choice a person can make. He had saved himself by spending her. She understood it. She would not forgive it. Those two things could coexist. She drank her coffee, and by 6, she had made the decision about how part 4 of this was going to go, not the finale. The finale was still assembling itself, still waiting on Heiress and the clinic, and the evidence she needed to be conclusive rather than merely convincing. But the next move, the immediate move. She was going to stop being invisible. Dante picked her up at 7 in a car she didn't recognize, which meant he'd borrowed it from someone outside his regular rotation. She noted this as evidence of the kind of operational carefulness she had come to expect from him. "Bianca is doing a live stream," he said before she'd closed the door. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. She's framing it as a personal announcement to the broader community. Her words. She's got connections to 3 media outlets, and she's opened it to political and business contacts as well as the family network." Celine looked at him. "She's going public." "Completely. And the framing," he paused. "She's going to use it to address the allegations she says you've been making against her character. She has documentation, she says, of harassment. She's describing you as unstable and retaliatory. She's going to use the live stream to bury me in front of an audience that includes everyone who matters." "Yes." Celine thought about this for approximately 4 seconds. "Good," she said. Dante looked at her. "Good. She needs a public moment. She's been building to one. Let her have it." Celine turned to look out the window at the early morning streets. "Because we're going to need the same audience she's assembling." The silence in the car was the silence of a man recalibrating. "How close are your people to the Delaware trace being commission presentable?" she said. "I'd say by this afternoon it's airtight." "And Heiress on the medical documentation?" "He's waiting on access to the clinic's internal system, which depends on the cousin," Celine said. "I know. Take me to Queens." The cousin's name was Angela Fiore, and she lived in a narrow house in Astoria, and she answered the door at 8 in the morning in a robe with the specific look of someone who had not slept well, which told Celine that Bianca had already been in contact and Angela already knew something was coming. "Miss Fiore," Celine said. "My name is Celine Ashford. I think you know who I am." Angela Fiore was 38 years old, slight, dark circles under her eyes that were not recent. She held the door in a way that was neither fully open nor moving to close. She looked at Celine the way people look at things they've been trying not to think about. "I have nothing to say to you," she said. "I know you don't want to. I'm going to ask you to do it anyway." Celine kept her voice even, unhurried. "Not for me, because the thing your clinic generated for Bianca is going to come out tonight regardless. I have a forensic document examiner with access to enough comparative data to make the case without your clinic's internal records. What your cooperation would change is where you stand when the commission's investigative body begins its formal process." She paused. Your clinic has 2 prior citations. A third, connected to document fabrication in support of an operation that defrauded a mafia family's internal governance. That's not a citation. That's a closure. Angela's hand tightened on the door. And your license, Celine said, quietly. Not as a threat, as a fact. I don't want that. I genuinely don't. But the question of what you want has a deadline of approximately, she glanced at her watch, 10 hours. Angela looked at her for a long moment. The robe, the dark circles, the hand on the door. She was a woman living inside a choice she'd already made, had made months ago, and she was standing in her doorway looking at the moment where that choice arrived to collect its cost. Come in, she said. By noon, Celine had what she needed. Not just the internal system access, the metadata Heiress needed to build the document fabrication case. Angela had also given her something she hadn't anticipated, a recorded phone call, a voicemail, saved, apparently on instinct from 6 weeks ago. Bianca's voice. 34 seconds of it. She played it once in the car outside Angela's house. Then she sent it to Dante. His response came back in 40 seconds. Where did you get this? She typed. Doesn't matter. Is it enough? His response, combined with everything else. Yes. She put the phone in her pocket and told Dante's driver to take her back to Manhattan. She had 7 hours before Bianca's live stream. 7 hours to position everything, coordinate the release, reach the right people in the right order, so that when Bianca opened her broadcast to the assembled audience of dons, captains, politicians, business contacts, and media connections, every piece of evidence was already in motion, already arriving in the inboxes and encrypted channels and private phones of every person in that audience before Bianca finished her first sentence. She was not going to watch the live stream from the outside. She called Dante. I need to be in the room, she said. The live stream is broadcasting from the Moretti estate. I know. Celine, I know. She looked out the window at the city, at the bridges in the distance and the gray sky above them and the river moving under it all, constant and cold and indifferent. I know what I'm asking. Can you get me in? A long pause. The Moretti estate has 12 external security points, Dante said. I know 3 of them from infrastructure I helped design 4 years ago during the joint security assessment. One of those 3 is currently staffed by a man who is in a financial situation that makes him, he paused, choosing the word, flexible. How flexible? Flexible enough? Then do it, she said. She dressed for it deliberately, not the way she would have dressed for a Moretti family event in the years when she had been the woman who stood beside their dawn, not the measured elegance of someone performing belonging. She dressed for herself. Black, clean lines, flat shoes she could move in. Her mother's necklace was still around Bianca's neck somewhere in that estate, and she was going to walk into the building where that was happening, and she was not going to flinch. Dante met her at 6:40 in a car on the service road that ran along the estate's eastern perimeter. He looked at her in the particular way he had, direct, assessing, without the social lubricant of pretending not to assess, and said nothing. She appreciated that. The evidence packets, she said. Are they ready? Heiress will release them on my signal. Simultaneously to Caruso's private channel, the 3 commission family heads who are not Moretti aligned, the 2 federal oversight contacts I have who've been building a case on Meridian for unrelated reasons, and every media contact on Bianca's own distribution list. He paused. I borrowed her list from the live stream's back-end system this afternoon. Celine almost smiled. You hacked her guest list. I prefer accessed. Of course. She looked at the estate through the car window. The lights were on across the ground floor. She could see the setup for the live stream through the tall windows of the main reception hall. Cameras, lighting rigs, the particular staging of something designed to look intimate while broadcasting to thousands. When she starts speaking, Celine said, give her 3 minutes. Let her establish the narrative. Let everyone in that room and watching from outside settle into believing it. And then release everything. Dante looked at her. And you? I'll be inside by then. The security point Dante had described was on the northeast corner, a gate that led to the kitchen service entrance, staffed tonight by a man named Griffin, who had made a decision earlier in the day that Dante had made financially comfortable. He let her through without making eye contact, which was both appropriate and all she needed. She moved through the kitchen corridor, familiar territory she had walked it 100 times in a different life, and into the interior of the estate. The sound of people assembling in the reception hall reached her from the far end of the central corridor. Voices. The particular pre-event ambient noise of a crowd that knows it's about to watch something. She counted the cameras she passed, 2 in the corridor, 1 at the junction toward the library. She had memorized the security layout years ago. The cameras in this section fed to a monitoring station on the 2nd floor, staffed during events by a single operator. She moved through the library, through the connecting passage that led to the balcony access above the reception hall. The balcony was technically a staff observation area, used during large events for additional security positioning. Tonight it would be, she estimated, unmanned or minimally staffed because the security resources were concentrated around the live stream setup itself. She was right. The balcony was empty. She stood in the shadow at the far end of it and looked down into the reception hall. The space was set up with Bianca at the center, a chair positioned in front of a minimal backdrop, professional lighting making her look polished, deliberate, composed. She was wearing a cream dress. She was wearing Celine's mother's necklace. Celine's hand closed around the balcony railing. Around Bianca, in a loose arc, not seated, positioned, were Lucien's senior captains. Lucien himself stood slightly behind the camera setup, arms crossed, watching. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had made a succession of choices that had led him to a room he didn't entirely recognize and had decided that looking tired was the closest he could get to acknowledging it. The live stream went live at 7:02. Celine watched from the shadows of the balcony as Bianca looked into the camera and began to speak. Her voice was low and precise and carried the particular register of practiced grief. Not sobbing, not theatrical, but weighted, as though every word cost something. She talked about the stress of the past weeks. She talked about Celine by name. Not with anger, she said, because anger wasn't something she had energy for, but with sadness, because she had never wanted to be in conflict with anyone, had only wanted to be a loyal member of the Moretti family's extended circle. She talked about the allegations that had been circulating, and here her hand moved to her abdomen, barely perceptibly, the smallest gesture in the world, and every person watching both in the room and through a screen registered it. She talked about fear for her unborn child. Celine watched Lucien's face during this, watched him watch Bianca. She was looking for something specific, the particular quality of a man who believes what he's hearing versus the particular quality of a man who knows what it is and has decided to accept it anyway. What she saw in his face was worse than either. It was the face of a man who had stopped asking that question, who had made his arrangement and was managing the performance of it, and had gone somewhere behind his own eyes where the distinction between true and useful no longer required resolution. She had loved this man. She had built on him the way you build on bedrock. 2 minutes and 40 seconds into Bianca's address, Celine's phone vibrated once. "Dante, ready on your signal." She typed back, "Now." She heard it before she saw it, the specific quality of the ambient sound in the room changing, the low murmur of phones receiving notifications simultaneously, the way the attention of 20 people in a room subtly redirects, the micro movements of hands reaching for devices that are suddenly urgent. One of Lucien's captains, a man named Suarez, who had worked with Celine directly for 4 years, looked at his phone and then looked up at the live stream setup with an expression she could read from 30 feet above as the expression of a man whose understanding of the room has just fundamentally changed. Then another captain, then 2 of the political contacts along the far wall, then the media connection near the door, a woman from one of the underground outlets who looked at her phone and then at Bianca with a quality of attention that had shifted from receptive to forensic. Bianca felt it. Celine could see her feel it. A slight adjustment in her posture, a micro pause in the rhythm of her speech, the eyes moving fractionally to read the room she'd assembled and finding it reading differently than expected. She continued speaking, but the confidence in her voice had altered at a frequency below what most people would consciously register. Celine registered it. She moved out of the shadow of the balcony and into the light, It was not planned exactly, or rather, it was the kind of plan that depends on a specific moment, and she had recognized the moment and moved into it. She stood at the balcony railing in the light that spilled up from the reception hall below, and she looked directly down at the room, and several things happened very quickly. Suarez looked up and saw her and said nothing, just went still in the way of a man recalibrating rapidly. Two of the cameras on the live stream captured her peripherally. She would see this later, the recording, the edge of her presence in the upper right frame, her face clearly identifiable. Lucien looked up. His face did something she could not entirely categorize. Not guilt, not anger, something more complex and more broken than either. And Bianca looked up. For the first time in all of this, through the scarf and the chair and the necklace and the media campaign and the pregnancy announcement and the live stream and the weeks of methodical dismantling, Celine and Bianca looked directly at each other. Bianca's hand moved again to her abdomen, the gesture she'd been using all evening. The armor. Celine held her gaze and did not look at the hand. And then Lucien's senior captain, Suarez, 4 years working with Celine, 4 years of watching her read situations with an accuracy he'd learned to trust, said, loudly enough for the live microphone to pick up clearly, "Someone tell me what I'm looking at on this phone right now." The room fractured, not violently, not yet, but the specific irreversible fracture of a controlled narrative encountering evidence it was not designed to accommodate. Voices, the sound of more phones producing notifications. The political contact near the door was already calling someone, stepping aside with the phone pressed hard against his ear. The media connection was typing rapidly, and Celine understood she was filing something right now, live, that would begin moving through the underground channels before the live stream even ended. Bianca looked away from Celine, looked back at her camera. Her voice, when it came, had lost the weight of practiced grief and found something harder and more brittle underneath. "I want to be very clear that whatever is being circulated tonight is a coordinated attack by the video," Suarez said, not to Bianca, to the room. "Someone tell me about this video." The hidden surveillance footage, the mirrored service corridor recording that Dante's investigators had located, was 12 seconds long. Celine had watched it once. She had not watched it again. She did not need to. She knew what it showed: a marble staircase, a mirrored surface in the service corridor that the primary security cameras had not covered, and Bianca Vale at the top of those stairs with no one near her, no one within arm's reach, no hand on her back, no contact of any kind. And then Bianca throwing herself forward with the particular deliberate quality of a controlled fall. 12 seconds. The room had it now. Lucien's face, from 30 feet above, was the face of a man watching the architecture of a very specific decision collapse in real time. He had known about Meridian. He had not, Celine was now nearly certain, known about the fall. Bianca had kept that one for herself. Her own operation, inside Meridian's operation, the move she had designed to be so decisive that Lucien's choice would be made for him in front of witnesses. He had not known she was going to do it, and now he was standing in a room full of people watching 12 seconds of video that made everything else, the pregnancy, the live stream, the public campaign against Celine, reorganize itself into a shape he could not manage, could not contain, could not absorb into any framework that left him standing. Lucien, his name from Celine, carried from the balcony, level without heat. He looked up. "I have the financial records," she said. "The Meridian authorization chain, the Delaware entity, the offshore transfers, the forged documents from the clinic." She paused. "I have Paul Carver's cooperation." Another pause. Measured. Deliberate. "I have your 8-month decision." The room was very quiet. Bianca, on camera, was speaking, but no one in the room was listening to her anymore. And the audience watching from outside, the Dons and their advisors, and the politicians and the commission's observer, who Celine knew was watching because Dante had confirmed it, were not listening either. They were reading. They were watching 12 seconds of video. They were receiving, in encrypted channels they trusted, a financial forensics document that the document finished loading on 43 phones simultaneously. Celine knew this because she watched it happen in the room below her. The specific, staggered sequence of people looking down at their screens and then looking up. The recalibration moving through the assembled crowd like a current through water, each face catching it and passing it forward. The commission's observer, a compact gray-haired man named Ellison who had been standing near the east wall with a glass of water he hadn't touched all evening, read his screen for approximately 90 seconds without moving. Then he put the glass down on the nearest surface and took out a second phone and began making a call. That was the moment Celine knew it was over. Not won. Over. Those were different things, and she understood the difference precisely. Bianca was still speaking into the camera. Her voice had acquired a desperate, accelerating quality. The rhythm of someone who understands that the ground is moving beneath them and believes that if they talk fast enough, they can outrun it. She was describing a conspiracy against her. She was describing Celine as the architect of a coordinated attack on her family, her pregnancy, her position. She used the word family 4 times in 90 seconds. She kept her hand at her abdomen. No one in the room was looking at her. The live stream's viewer count, Dante would tell Celine later, had climbed to 11,000 in the minutes since the evidence release. People were watching not because of Bianca, but because the comment feed had begun filling with people who had received the documents through secondary channels and were asking questions that the primary broadcast could not answer. The stream's moderators, 2 of Bianca's own people, were deleting comments as fast as they appeared and could not keep up. Celine came down from the balcony. She used the interior staircase on the north side, the one that led out near the main corridor junction, and she walked into the reception hall through the side entrance, and the room reorganized around her arrival, the way rooms do when the person who is supposed to be absent walks in. There was a specific silence, not complete. The live stream audio continued, Bianca's voice continued. But the particular silence of 20 people deciding simultaneously not to be the first one to speak. Lucien was the first one to speak. Celine, her name, from across the room. His voice had the quality she had never heard in it before. Not in 10 years, not in boardrooms or crises, or the quiet of private arguments. It had the quality of a man who no longer knows which role he is playing because the script has been removed. She looked at him. She crossed the room at a measured pace and stopped 6 feet from him because 6 feet was the distance that made a conversation rather than a confrontation. And she needed this to be a conversation, or at least to look like one, for another few minutes. The commission's observer is making a call, she said, keeping her voice low. In approximately 15 minutes, Ellison is going to formally request a suspension of your authority pending a commission investigation. If you contest it, the financial documentation goes to the federal contacts Dante's people have already briefed. If you don't contest it, the investigation proceeds internally and you retain some agency over the outcome. Lucien looked at her. His jaw was working. She could see the specific, familiar way his mind was moving, not through denial, he was past that, but through the options remaining, the moves left, the angles of a board that had become very narrow. You did this, he said. Bianca did this, she said. Meridian did this. Paul Carver did this for 3 years while you weren't looking. She paused. And you did this when you decided 8 months ago that I was an acceptable loss. He flinched. She had not expected the flinch. She had expected him to manage it better, to keep his face still the way he always kept his face still, and the flinch told her something about what it had cost him, what he had spent to maintain the past 8 months. She registered it and kept going. Don't contest the suspension, she said. It's the only move that leaves you with anything. You're telling me how to survive this. I'm telling you how to survive the next 15 minutes. What comes after that is your problem. She held his gaze for another moment. There was history in the space between them. 10 years of it, the specific weight of a decade of proximity and trust and shared survival, and she felt it, acknowledged it, and let it be what it was. Past tense, accurate and past. Then she turned away. Bianca had stopped broadcasting. The live stream had ended, cut, not signed off, the feed simply terminating. And Bianca was standing at the center of the room's staging area with the professional lighting still washing over her in a way that now looked less like preparation and more like exposure. She was looking at Celine. Her hand had dropped from her abdomen. Whatever the practiced grief had been built on, It was not available to her right now. Celine walked toward her. The captains in the room shifted, but no one moved to intervene, and Celine noted this as its own data point. The men who would have stepped forward 40 minutes ago to manage her presence in this room were now reading the situation differently, resorting their allegiances in the rapid, pragmatic way of people inside a structure that is visibly reorganizing. She stopped 2 feet from Bianca. Up close, Bianca Vale was not what the past weeks had made her in Celine's mind. Not the shape of a threat, not the embodiment of a campaign, not the representative of a system designed to erase her. She was a woman in her early 30s with expensive shoes and a cream dress, and the look of someone who had been running very fast for a very long time and had just stopped. Her eyes were doing something that was not quite fear and not quite defiance. Something caught between them, exhausted. Celine reached out and unclasped the necklace from around Bianca's neck. Her hands were steady. The clasp was a small, fiddly thing she had operated 1,000 times on herself, and she had it open in 4 seconds. She held the necklace in her palm for a moment. 3 strands, antique setting, the weight of it familiar, the weight of it meaning something that had nothing to do with any of this. And she closed her fingers around it. Bianca did not resist, did not speak. "Who sent you?" Celine said, quietly. Bianca was quiet for a moment. Then, "You already know." "I know Meridian. I know Theodore Ashby. I want to know who inside Meridian made the approach. Who ran you?" Bianca looked at her. Something moved behind her eyes. The calculation of a woman assessing what she had left to trade and what it was worth. "If I give you that," she said, "what does it change for me?" "Nothing tonight," Celine said. "But the federal contacts who received the financial documentation tonight are going to be speaking to you within the next 36 hours. What you give them determines what the next few years of your life look like. I can't control that. I can tell them you cooperated here first." Bianca was quiet again. The lighting above her hummed faintly. Somewhere in the room behind Celine, voices were low and continuous. The reorganization happening in real time. Captains talking to each other, phones being used, the structure adjusting to a new center of gravity. "His name is Warren Cole," Bianca said. "He's Ashby's operational director. He approached me 2 years before I was placed in the Moretti organization. I'd done prior work for a different firm. He knew my background." "Prior work meaning intelligence?" "Meaning I've done this before." She said it without apology and without pride, just fact. Celine looked at her. "Did you know about Carver from the beginning?" "Carver was already in place when I arrived. I was given his contact information as my internal resource. I never met him in person until—" She stopped. Until he told me Lucien had found out. 8 months ago. Carver called me the night after Lucien's meeting with Ashby's representatives. He said Lucien had agreed to the framework and that I should continue the operation. She looked at Celine with something that was not quite an apology and not quite an explanation, but sat somewhere between them. "I didn't design what happened to you. I was given an objective and a timeline and a set of methods. The methods were," she paused, "mine to choose." "And you chose them well," Celine said. Bianca held her gaze. "You would have done the same." Celine thought about that for 1 second, honestly. "I would not have taken the necklace," she said. She turned and walked away. Ellison made his formal request at 7:49. Celine was in the estate's secondary library, a room she had spent time in over 10 years, the room where she had done much of the strategic work that had built what was now being investigated, when Dante found her and told her. "Lucien didn't contest it," he said. "Good. The commission is convening an emergency session, probably within the week." He sat down in the chair across from her. He had a stillness to him tonight that was different from his usual controlled quality. Less managed, more genuine. Bianca's been taken into federal custody. The agents were apparently already on their way when the documents hit. The federal contacts moved fast. They had a file on Meridian that was apparently already substantial. What we gave them was the domestic criminal connection they were missing. He paused. "Warren Cole's name will be very useful to them." Bianca gave him up. Smart of her. "Instinct," Celine said. She's a survivor. She looked at the necklace in her hand. She had been holding it since the reception hall, had not put it on, had not put it down. She set it on the table beside her now and looked at it there, the antique setting catching the lamplight, the 3 strands of diamonds her mother had worn and her grandmother before that, the piece that had been in a vault for 5 years while she was moving through a decade of someone else's empire. She was going to take it home tonight and put it somewhere she could see it. Dante was watching her. "Are you all right?" She considered the question with the same honest attention she'd given Bianca's. "I'll let you know in about a week," she said. He almost smiled. "Fair." Paul Carver presented himself to the Commission's investigative representatives the following morning. He had called Celine at 6 a.m. to tell her he was going to do this, which she had not expected, and she had sat with her coffee and listened to his voice on the phone, tired, stripped of the professional register it usually carried, sounding like the age he actually was. And she had said, "Tell them about Warren Cole, too." And he had said he would. She did not offer him forgiveness. He did not ask for it. They were both adults who had been inside a world that ran on calculation, and they each knew what the other had done and why, and forgiveness was not the currency the situation was denominated in. "My daughter," he said before he hung up. "She doesn't know any of this." "She won't hear it from me," Celine said. That was what she could offer. She offered it. The Commission's emergency session lasted 3 days. Celine was not present for it. She had provided her documentation through Dante's formal representation and had been told, through channels, that her testimony might be requested, but that the evidentiary record was sufficient to proceed without it. She spent those 3 days doing something that felt radical by the standards of the past month. She slept. She ate actual meals. She sat at the window with coffee and watched the city go about itself. On the second day, she called her attorneys, not the family attorneys who had been connected to the Moretti infrastructure, but the woman she had retained privately years ago, on the instinct that having a personal legal advisor was a form of insurance she hoped never to use. The attorney's name was Gretchen Moore, and she was 61 years old and had the disposition of someone who had encountered most of the possible configurations of human behavior and had decided to charge accordingly. Celine walked her through it. Gretchen listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. Then she said, "You documented your strategic contributions throughout." "Yes." "The offshore restructuring, the Falcone truce, the federal investigation navigation. All of it. Then you have a significant intellectual property and strategic compensation claim against the Moretti organization's assets, which will be in a state of reorganization, which is actually a more favorable environment for that kind of claim than a functioning operation." She paused. "You built a substantial portion of what's about to be redistributed. You should be at the table when it's redistributed." Celine had known this, abstractly, somewhere in the architecture of what she'd been building. Hearing it said plainly by someone outside, it made it real in a different way. "Start the filing," she said. But the Commission's ruling came on the 4th day. Lucien Moretti's authority was formally suspended pending a full investigation into the unauthorized use of Moretti financial infrastructure in connection with Meridian Consulting's operations. The ruling cited the financial forensics documentation, the Carver authorization chain, the medical document fabrication, and the hidden surveillance footage. It was, by Commission standards, a comprehensive and unusually public evisceration. The captains who had been in the reception hall that night reorganized with a speed that Celine found neither surprising nor contemptible. Survival was the operative value in their world. She had always known that. What she had not expected was the call from Norma Moretti. Lucien's mother was 81 years old and had spent 60 of those years as the quiet center of the Moretti family's gravitational field. Not operational, not strategic, not visible in any way that the family's enemies could target, but present in the way that certain people are present, as the thing that everything else orbits. She had met Celine once, 4 years into Celine's relationship with Lucien, at a lunch that Lucien had arranged and been nervous about, which itself told Celine something. Norma had looked at her across a restaurant table with eyes that were sharp and assessing and had said, at the end of 2 hours, "You're the one who understands how it works." Not as a compliment, as an observation, as the kind of accurate, unadorned statement that very old women sometimes make when they've decided the social cost of accuracy is no longer worth paying. She called Celine on the 5th day. Her voice on the phone was exactly what it had been at that lunch. Unhurried, precise, slightly raspy with age. "I owe you an apology," Norma said. Celine was standing in the kitchen. She sat down. "Mrs. Moretti, don't do that. I'm 81 and I've been wrong, and I'm telling you I've been wrong. I knew about the woman. I knew before you did. I chose not to tell you because I believed Lucian would resolve it himself." A pause. He didn't resolve it himself. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the city, the ordinary sound of a day. "He never deserved what you built for him," Norma said. "I knew that too. I let myself believe the building mattered more than who it was built for." Celine was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because next week I'm presenting a formal statement to the Commission's investigative body. And in that statement I intend to say publicly what I've known privately for 10 years. That the Moretti organization's real strategic architect was never my son." Her voice was steady, absolutely steady. "I want you to know before I say it in a room full of men who should have known it already." Celine looked at her own hands on the kitchen table. The place where the ring had been for 10 years was indistinguishable now from the rest of her finger. The skin had already adjusted. The body moved on faster than everything else. "You don't have to do that," Celine said. "I'm not doing it for you," Norma said. "I'm doing it because it's accurate, and I'm too old to let accurate things go unsaid because they're inconvenient." She hung up. Celine sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Lucien came to the apartment on the 7th day. He called first, which he had not done the last time, and she decided to answer and told him he could come, because there were things that needed to be said in person, and she was done deferring them. He looked diminished. That was the word her mind produced. Not destroyed, not broken, but diminished, the way structures look after the load-bearing element is removed. He was still physically the same. The height, the bone structure, the clothes that still fit because bodies don't know when everything else has changed. But the quality he had always carried, the gravitational field of authority that had made rooms configure around him, was absent. She was not sure if it was temporarily gone or permanently. She suspected he did not know either. He sat on the couch. She sat in the chair. The same positions as the last time he was here. She noted this without commenting on it. "The Commission is going to take the organization apart," he said. "Parts of it. The parts connected to Meridian's framework. What's clean can be restructured. Under Commission oversight." "Yes." He looked at his hands. "Carver has been talking, extensively." "I know." He said. Lucian stopped. He pressed his mouth together. "He said you told him his daughter should consider which side of this she wanted her father to be on." "Something like that." "That was—" He stopped again. "That was the right move." He said it without bitterness, which surprised her. He said it the way a man says something when he has decided that being accurate is the only thing he has left. "You were always better at this than I was." "Yes," she said, without cruelty, without satisfaction, just accurate the way Norma had been accurate. "I was." He looked up. His eyes were the eyes she remembered, dark, complex, the eyes of a man who had always thought more than he said. She had loved those eyes. She was aware of having loved them without that awareness meaning anything active anymore. "I didn't know about the fall," he said. "The staircase. I didn't know she was going to do that." "I know." "I knew about—" He paused. "The other things. The campaign against you. The pregnancy announcement." His jaw tightened. "I told myself it was containment, that I was managing the situation." "You were managing your survival," she said. "You just convinced yourself those were the same thing." He looked at the floor a long moment. Then, "Is there—" He stopped, started again. "Is there anything I can—" "No," she said, quietly, not angrily. "There isn't." He nodded. He had known that before he started the sentence. She could see that he'd known it. He stood. He moved toward the door and stopped, and she thought he was going to say something final, something shaped like an ending, and she waited for it. But he didn't. He just stood for a moment with his hand near the door, and then he opened it and walked out. She sat in the chair for a while after the sound of the elevator faded. She was not crying. She was not relieved. She was not triumphant. She was something that did not have a clean name, the specific state of a person who has been through something that changed the shape of everything and has come out the other side into a life that still has to be lived, day by day, in the ordinary way that lives require. She picked up the necklace from the table where she'd left it, put it on, went to the bathroom mirror and looked at herself wearing it. Her face, the necklace, the apartment behind her that was too large and had always been too large. She stood there for a moment and let it be real, all of it, the whole exact weight of it. Then she went back to the desk. 3 weeks later, in a conference room in Midtown, Celine and Dante signed a partnership agreement for a legitimate global security consulting firm, operational intelligence, financial forensics, organizational risk management. The kind of work that lived in the borderland between the world they had come from and the world that didn't require them to be invisible inside it. The firm had 3 initial clients, one of whom was the European alliance that had been Meridian's target, and whose principals had approached Dante within 48 hours of the evidence release with the particular urgency of people who had narrowly escaped a trap and wanted immediately to work with whoever had sprung it. The conference room had a window that looked east toward the river. After the signing, after the attorneys had gathered their papers and the assistants had collected the coffee cups, Dante and Celine stood at the window for a moment in the particular quiet of something beginning. "You could have destroyed him completely," Dante said. "He meant Lucien. He was looking out at the city." "The commission handled it," she said. "You could have made it worse for him. You had the access." She thought about this honestly. I didn't want him destroyed." She paused, choosing accuracy over the simpler answer. "I wanted him to have to live with accurate knowledge of what he chose. That's worse than destruction for a man like that. Destruction is clean." Dante was quiet for a moment. "And Bianca?" "Federal prosecution. She'll cooperate, probably get a reduced term." She looked at the river, the morning light on it. "She was very good at what she did. She almost won." "She would have won," Celine said, "if I'd been anyone else." There was no arrogance in how she said it. It was the same quality of accuracy that Norma had used, that Celine was learning to carry without apology. The simple, grounded acknowledgement of what was true about herself, spoken in a voice that didn't need the room's permission to say it. Dante looked at her, that direct, assessing look she had learned to read as something close to respect. "What do you want this to be?" he said. He meant the firm. Maybe more than the firm. He was precise enough in his language that the ambiguity was deliberate. "Something real," she said. "Something I actually own." She turned from the window, "and something that makes it very inconvenient for anyone who tries what Meridian tried." He nodded. She picked up her bag and her coat from the chair, and she walked out of the conference room into the hallway, which was bright and unremarkable and smelled like any office building anywhere. And she walked through it without hurrying, without the particular quality of invisible movement she had spent a decade practicing in corridors that had never been hers. She walked like a woman in a building she intended to be in. Like a woman who had built something before and knew, precisely and without illusion, what building something actually cost. The material of it, the real material, what it was made of when you stripped away the sentiment and looked at the structure underneath. She knew the structure. She had been the structure for longer than she'd known, and now the structure was hers. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving, indifferent, continuous, the river catching light in the distance and the bridges holding their quiet positions above it, and the streets full of people who did not know and would not know what had happened in the past month inside the rooms that moved the invisible machinery of things. She walked into it, into the ordinary November morning, the cold that was direct and personal and hers. She did not look back at the building. She did not need to. She knew where she was going.